to kick off. Hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here today. I am really sorry I couldn't get to you in Liverpool, and I'm here briefly this afternoon. So I'm sorry I do need to slip away after my presentation. So I'd be happy to take any questions immediately, and I'm sorry I can't stay around for the Q&A. But let's crack on, and hopefully you'll enjoy this sort of little look back at some of the work that the CBA has been doing over the last year to 18 months, looking at our audiences, looking at how people want to consume archaeological content, and actually how we as a sector think we're doing in some aspects of creating content. And I'm going to be using two main pieces of work to actually structure this conversation. The first one is our trial and error research, or more colloquially known as Puns 2. I'll come on to that in a minute, which has now been published and you can actually find on our website. And then the second piece of work is that's structured around our current Heritage Fund project, Reconnecting Archaeology, which has been a slightly deeper dive into the nitty gritty of the CBA's own personal audiences, and actually how do we connect with people, and what's that actually looking like. And from both of those two things, I'm going to just give you some very quick oversights and some sort of areas for thought in actually how we actually might move forward. So first of all, trial and error, what is it? Well, it's actually a repeat of a survey first done 25 years ago. But 25 years ago, it focused solely on publications. So it was the name was Puns Publication User Needs Survey. And when we were asked to redo this by Historic England as part of the 21 CAP series of projects looking at the future of archaeology in England, we were really clear that we didn't want to just focus on publications. We actually wanted to broaden the actual concept out to actually what the public actually want, or what they're actually looking at. And so hence it's still puns, but for us, the P is actually about the public. So again, this was very much public facing. And the most important thing that we actually did is we tried to take an audience targeting approach. Okay, so we came up using some work that Historic England's done around audience segmentation, trying to segment the population of the United Kingdom to actually see if we could reach more voices than we traditionally do in archaeology. As I said, the reports and summary reports are all available now on the CBA's website. The way the question bank was structured, there was a digital survey and a paper survey, and then some in-person exercises. The digital survey allowed you, after a set of opening questions, to take one of two paths, depending on whether you are an archaeological consumer of information or an archaeological producer of information. So you're allowed a choice as to which one you'd actually go down. And in many ways, this is where we get our first really interesting piece of information. So again, this is those people who consider themselves to be archaeological producers had the following responses to these set questions. Do you target your audience? 47% said yes, 37% said no. So in some senses, that's quite good. Nearly half of people are trying to target their audiences. When asked how far they agree that what I create, is being used as intended, 75% said they felt that was correct, and that's what was actually happening. They had agreed with that statement. And when asked about creating archaeological content, did they do it with a clear purpose and intention? Wonderfully, 58% said yes, they did. Or an additional 29% said they had it with some purpose or intention. So they're really, really good results, except when you consider the final question we asked in this sequence. Do you actually collect any feedback or analytical data from the archaeological content or information that you create and share? 59% of people said no. So this really led us to actually question whether any of the previous questions were really valid, because nobody was actually creating any data that actually said they were targeting audiences effectively, that actually they were reaching beyond our usual conversations. And really interestingly, we can see why this might be in the next couple of slides. So when we asked when you use archaeological content to communicate stories of the past to people, do you have the following? Time to do so, budget, skills required, confidence. Really interestingly, great responses for confidence and skills, not such great responses from the time required to do it or the budget. So again, really interestingly, we seem to be purposely downplaying that side of the conversation. And then when we ask people if they had how they developed an understanding of their audiences and how to engage with them, did they have the following resources: time, budget, skills, knowledge? Wonderfully, skills, yes. Knowledge, yes. Time and budget, no. So really interestingly, there seems to be an almost purpose-like downplaying of the resources and the time we actually need to communicate effectively around archaeology. That's one of the really important things that's coming out about producers. What I now want to do is just have a look at the consumers, and obviously the report is massive, so I'm only flicking on some real highlights here. So the first question we ask people is, how do you usually take in content and information? And we were able to analyze this by age as well. And again, what's really interesting in this is how well reading or books text actually comes across in all age groups. Okay, so there was a real perception that as soon as you have a familiarity with the content, you're really happy to dive deeply into that content. Your complex archaeological conversations are absolutely okay. But what's absolutely fascinating is the way that people get into those conversations is fundamentally changing. So you won't be surprised, for those aged 45 years and older, social media tails off dramatically. So that way that you are exposed to archaeological content rapidly changes. And then obviously for younger audiences, that social media content becomes really so much more important. So there's a really important factor here. We need to start thinking about the role social media plays, not in giving complex information out, but acting as a navigational tool to actually help people get into the conversations and learn what the opportunities, how you navigate through the really broad realm of archaeology that is actually out there. Once they're comfortable with that, they will absolutely go to written material. They will go to that deeper dive. But we've got to think now, again, the access points into our conversations. They were very different for that audience who are now aged 45 and above than they are at present. And I'll come on to that point when I look at some of the other work the CBAs do. Really positively, however, the thing that comes across in all age groups as being really important is being able to access content via YouTube. So YouTube enables both short form content and long form content, and across all age groups, it is the one place that unanimously that people are actually going to and really enjoying using, and they find it really important. So, what is our strategy potentially on YouTube about how we actually collate, present, theme archaeological content and such like? So they're the broad conversations that we had through the survey data, and that is primarily the digital and paper version of the survey. And overall, we had over 3,000 responses and engagement. So, statistically, we're very happy that this is valid data. But what's really interesting is when you consider the actual layout and the distribution, you start to get some really interesting analysis in. Overwhelmingly, those people who responded either to the paper survey or the digital survey were known to archaeology. We knew these people know the conversation around archaeology. They are our existing audience by far and away. What we actually wanted to do was actually reach different audiences, those underserved communities who might not think archaeology is a conversation for them. How do we actually have a conversation about archaeology without saying to them, come and talk to us about archaeology? And so we actually used the data from the actual initial tranches of the digital survey to actually see where we'd got cold spots and how we could actually hit them. And really interestingly, part of the grant application in Scotland required us to actually do some very specific stuff around EDI, and they actually gave us quite a lot of support. There are some really interesting mechanisms for reaching broader audiences in Scotland that I'm not entirely convinced that actually the grant processes in England actually facilitated. And through that process, what we did is we held a series of workshops, and in those workshops, we went out to try and create relationships to underserved communities to actually try and have a conversation with them. What was really interesting is the flaw in our methodology is actually reaching underserved communities, creating the level of trust that they feel confident talking to you, does not fit into the timescale of a research project. Okay. And I'll give you one example. We came across a Kurdish women's group in Glasgow. They were really keen to actually talk to us. But at the time the data collection exercise was going on, it was Ramadan. So they could not talk. They did not want to talk to us during that time. Okay. By the time Ramadan finished, our data collection phase of the work had actually finished. Okay. Now, because we'd started that conversation, we actually changed our methodology and we specifically went and did an extra workshop just for them in Glasgow with them because we were really conscious of that level of trust and that introducing a conversation and what that actually looks like. And again, there was some really, really powerful stuff there. And of course, the headline thing that comes out of them, it's not that they're not interested in archaeology, it's they have a very, very different perception of what it is and particularly what it means to them directly as individuals. And one of the really interesting things that came out of that conversation was this idea that they almost felt constrained by the notion of national heritage in the UK. They saw it as something that was given to people by the government, whereas what actually heritage and archaeology was meaning to them was far more personal. It was about their own life experience. It was about their own, literally their own pots and pans that they carried with them and were often multi-generational. So again, this was a really important way of actually understanding we as archaeologists need to change our perceptions in actually how we engage. And indeed, our engagement with the groups that we actually went out to did actually lead us to writing an entirely separate leaflet as feedback from them. So the main report has a very detailed report. It has a summary. The summary has been translated into Welsh and Gaelic. But actually, we produced a very short two-sided leaflet that is being translated into Urdu and into Kurdish as well, but changed our language almost totally. And actually, I really like reflecting back on what we actually said about that. So these workshops were saying they were really interested in how they keep traditions alive. Everyday life matters to them. Doing the right thing, the conversation around conservation and what that means and people is really important to them. They want that connection hands-on. They don't want to be left out. They want us to get there. And that we need to do a lot more to actually make archaeology more open to anyone. How do we bring people into this conversation and what are the barriers? The report came up with 4 conclusions, okay, and it came up with over 60 recommendations. I am not going to try and go through all of them, but the headline conclusions are as follows. The dominant focus on the historical record and data-first culture means archaeologists, and this is us as humans, risk undervaluing and hiding ourselves and our practices. Bluntly, we're becoming blind in this process. Okay, our obsession with data and finds I really believe in the long term, it's actually damaging us as a profession, and actually we need to reevaluate what we think about that. Archaeological data is siloed and dispersed. It might be easy for archaeologists to get access to it and understand how to navigate it, but for other people, it's a really complex place, particularly around our scientific language, which actually leads into the next conclusion. The traditional view of archaeology is still loaded with elitism, leading to exclusion. A lot of that is around our language. One of the big feedbacks was we want that technical conversation, but we want it in language we can understand. And then fundamentally, there is a huge lack of understanding around audience selection and little tracking of feedback and evaluation. Now, I know I'm probably talking to the converted in the museum sector, but I am looking at this from the perspective of archaeology and archaeologists, and I still think we're very far behind in that conversation. So that's the trial and error survey. What I want to do now is just focus a little bit on who our principal audiences might be and what the CBA is doing in terms of these conversations. And I have to say, in terms of grassroots archaeology, I think we should be starting to look at a really critical point in time for how many people are actually actively part of archaeological groups and societies. The CBA since 2010 has done 3 surveys trying to look at the total quorum of people engaged in grassroots archaeology. I have to say now, the real problem is every time we've done this, we've used a different methodology. So actually, it's almost impossible to actually read across um, comparison data to actually say whether the numbers of people engaged have gone up or down. All we can talk about with confidence is actually the number of organisational members of the CBA. And since 1997, this has over halved. So in 1997, we had 500 organisations that were members of the CBA. Now we only have 250. Okay, so it's really interesting that actually that bedrock, that place people originally got engaged in archaeology, particularly if you're over 60, those archaeological groups and societies are possibly going by the wayside. They are falling away, and I think we need to be really conscious about that. So if we actually took 250 to 300 active groups, I think we can possibly only start talking about 17 to 20,000 active people in those groups. Now, if you think there are 50,000 potentially active metal detectorists, there's a really interesting conversation going on about what that actually looks like and who these people are. And certainly we've done some now further work through our Reconnecting Archaeology project, looking at the CBA itself and what our own members actually think about us. And what's really interesting is we are totally caught now between this idea of being a professional body and a hobbyist membership. And at worst, we're neither, and we're not satisfying either. There seems to be a really strong perception that you can't be both. And actually, how do we keep these two audiences talking? We need to really understand that we need to change our approach to audiences. We cannot just expect people to come to us now, like we did in the past. We have to be able to go out to communities, connect with them, find out what matters to them, and really understand what are the barriers to accessing and participating in archaeology and how we do that. And I have to be clear here, one of the most important things is we've got to move the perception of archaeology away from just digging. Okay, our skill set and the questions we ask about the world around us are far broader than just excavating. I know how exciting it is, but actually, it's not done to the degree that increases audiences like these. So, some of the things we're now learning about all of this data that we're actually getting is that we have the evidence to say there's a real significant lack of diversity in who participates in archaeology, and we know that's the case at grassroots level and professionally. Okay, this means there is a loss to individuals with a potential impact on community well-being and cohesion. So we're just not out there anymore. There is a loss to the discipline of archaeology in terms of our relevance to society and the benefit of diverse perspectives, and directly for the CBA, that there is a loss in terms of our membership and our unrestricted income. There is a real challenge about how long we can survive with falling memberships. In Reconnecting Archaeology, we have piloted some projects where we've really tried to turn around this concept of how we engage with people to create a more emotive positioning and conversation. And we've done exercises about memory and meaning to get people to actually start talking about those places that inspire value within them and why they like them. We've worked with young people to do photographic exhibitions around their heritage and how they perceive that and how they perceive archaeology. And then we've created an entire platform called Out and About Archaeology, or Archaeology Explore, where we're creating a series of walks and activities that can be self-guided activities for people to be able to get out into the environments around them and just explore the places in which they live. So again, this is about empowering people to look outward. One of the other exercises we've done is a full leadership survey of British archaeology magazine. And some of these results have been really fascinating. The headline result is most of the people who read our magazine only want to read it in a paper version. They don't want to read it online. They don't want a digital magazine. And the other thing that they actually want is they are almost entirely concerned with archaeological excavation, digs, and finds. Okay. When we have put content in about the work the CBA does, and about young people, the overwhelming response is they don't want to see that in their magazine. Their magazine is just about finds. And indeed, when you actually look at some of the content that we focused on in recent years, I have to say it's not surprising this is what they want. Oh, blow me down. Stonehenge is the thing that appears on the cover most in our magazine, and the amount of time that we talk about treasure is it comes a close second. And I think we as archaeologists really have to start questioning the narratives we're using. Okay. And I am absolutely convinced now that one of the outputs we're seeing from commercial archaeology is a complete restriction of the narrative around the processes that we actually do. The only time we talk to the public is to announce what we've found. And often that is accompanied with archaeologists are baffled, archaeologists are surprised. Who knew about this? Or look at this amazing treasure, look at this amazing bling. In a sense, there's almost a ramping up of the rhetoric about the finds first conversation, which is that goes back to that point about devaluing us. And so as archaeologists, I think we need to address that. So our real challenge is shifting perceptions, but also understanding we are really talking to two audiences now. There is a very traditional, very knowledgeable audience who like that paper format, like a lot of detailed conversation. There is a younger audience who are accessing archaeology in multiple ways that are very different to the traditional ways we've been doing, like a written magazine. And we need to be able to speak to both of these audiences. One, to retain the investment the traditional audience give, one, to actually evolve and actually think about that, where that goes. And again, I think when you start to talk to people about what archaeology actually means, it is this incredible thing that they move to this space where it is about them. It is about where their place in the conversation actually is. And I think as archaeologists, we really need to get onto that page.